A new report from the Association of School Business Officials says the number of students living in poverty is increasing, and they're seeing a direct correlation between socioeconomic status and test scores. Outside of New York City, the Mohawk Valley has the highest poverty rates and the lowest ELA and math proficiency scores. Joining me now to tell us more about this report and what should be done about these issues is Michael Borges, Executive Director of the Association. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So this isn't a secret. I mean, first of all, you have a declining population rate, so you have declining enrollment numbers.
Right.
A lot of times enrollment is tied to aid, so
Yes.
in some kind of formulaic fashion. And you have the higher percentage of kids who are left with a bigger need and a bigger challenge, effectively.
Oh, yep, you hit it right on the nail again.
Good, thanks for coming.
Conversation over.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, about 89% of the school districts in the state have lost population over the last 10 years, and about 18% or 19% have gained. And so what you see is a declining population, but the population that is gaining is, as you mentioned, was the high need students. So you have more students, about 32,000 more students who are in poverty. You're also seeing increases in English language learners, and you're seeing increases in special ed students. So even though the overall population may be declining of students, the ones that cost the most are increasing, which is why you don't see, normally you would see, oh, the student population is declining, so why are we still spending more money? Well, because the ones who are remaining and the growth is occurring in the students that require sometimes twice as much to educate as a general education student.
Well, and also this is not a problem that we don't know the answer to.
Right.
So there have been studies, numerous studies that have shown that if a kid with challenges in poverty, who has ELA issues or any other challenges to educate, has 3 years of really good teachers, that student can catch up and make gains, but it takes an investment.
Right. I mean, again, there's no surprises in a lot of the information in our report, but it just kind of emphasizes that where you spend the most money, you're going to get the best results. So like on Long Island, where they spend more money and have higher proficiency in ELA and math, their results are better, obviously. Whereas in low-income areas of the state, where they spend less money per pupil, where they have higher poverty, the results are not as good. So there is a direct correlation. The foundation aid formula was established to, in part, addressed most of those discrepancies. But what's happened over time, and it's been now over 10 years since the foundation aid formula was created, is that formula has not kept up with more recent statistics. So we're still using 2000 census information to develop the foundation aid. We haven't tweaked the formula to account for densities of poverty and the increase in poverty.
No, but we have tweaked the formula to do other things like hold certain districts harmless.
Well, yes. I mean, we were looking at that and going like, they did have 4 tiers in the recently passed state budget, and the most infamous one was the tier B for the Brighton School District. And, and they had a tier D that would drove some money to the big 4 school districts and high poverty districts, but it's not systematic. It wasn't an institutional change in the foundation aid formula. It could go away next year. What we were asking for was long-lasting, permanent, structural changes to the foundation aid formula that would address all the issues that were outlined in our report in terms of the growth in ELL, the growth in special needs, the growth in poverty, and that didn't happen.
Well, what's really interesting, though, is that these numbers do bear out, one surprise for me at any rate, is that, as I mentioned, the Mohawk Valley with this highest rate, where we have seen, for example, Syracuse, which is in central New York and not the Mohawk Valley, that's not where you, which has the highest rate of childhood poverty in the nation. So, and Rochester, we know, has a big problem with that as well. And so I am surprised. What is it in the Mohawk Valley that is bearing out this result?
I think you have a combination of rural poverty and small city poverty. So you have places like Rome and Utica, but you also have large swaths of rural poverty. So I think the combination of both because you have Syracuse, where there's a concentration of poverty, but in central New York, you're surrounded by well-to-do suburbs. Whereas places like, I guess, Utica and Rome don't have as many of those offsetting wealthier suburbs. So I think that's you have a broader sense of poverty in the Mohawk Valley.
Well, and also they have a lot of second language kids.
Yes, they also have a lot of immigrants from Burma and Myanmar, Burma,
right.
And other places are from around
Bosnia,
the world.
et cetera.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So also, and we're having this conversation this evening, and I think we really need to broaden out the findings of your report and where it fits into sort of the macro view of the world right now. So we're having a conversation this evening about salt,
right,
and the lack of this potential lack of the salt deduction, right, and that is being discussed as part of tax reform in DC. So how does that impact this conversation that you're trying to have with elected officials and saying, hey, could we please, I don't know, you're almost like replant a new tree instead of just growing all these branches off the trunk of the foundation aid formula,
right.
Shore up the trunk and stop fiddling with it, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, we have a tendency, well, the legislature has a tendency, and the state policymakers have a tendency just to add on to things.
Right.
It's sort of a Band-Aid approach. They're more reactive than proactive. And
they don't want to do surgery.
Right. So, but I think that in this case, there are certain enhancements and upgrades to a foundation aid formula, if it was allowed to work as it was intended, would drive more money to those districts that need it, and those students that need it the most.
So in a best case scenario, let's assume they let foundation aid roll the way it's supposed to, but then the SALT deduction goes away. What does that mean?
Well, I think we're facing, as the controller said, there's a trifecta of calamities facing New York State, particularly public education, when it comes to cuts in Medicaid, cuts in the federal funding for education, and now potentially the loss of SALT.
But the percentage of federal funding for education is pretty small.
Well, in some areas, yes. I mean, overall, I think statewide, it's somewhere around 7 to 9%.
Okay.
But in Title I, Title II, I mean, it could be substantial for some of the, like Syracuse and the Rochesters and the New York cities.
Sure.
But yes, overall, federal funding is small. We also get a considerable amount of money in Medicaid. A lot of our special needs programs are funded by Medicaid. They're Medicaid eligible expenses, and if we lose that, that's a big hit for school districts. And those Medicaid school districts tend to be low wealth school districts, or they're very dependent on state aid. So, the state's going to have to make a decision about, all right, so we're going to face these cuts, right? And the two biggest parts of the state budget is healthcare and education. Where are we going to allocate the money? Who are we going to cut?
In an election year.
Or education?
Neither.
Right. Well, I don't know. I mean, the state's fiscal situation, even beyond what happens at the federal level, was already headed in the wrong direction.
Yeah, according to the comptroller, it's headed in an extra wrong direction.
In an extra wrong direction. So, but that's why I think we need to really focus on how do we spend our money? Not so much how much money we spend, but how we spend the money that we're getting, and how we do it more effectively, more efficiently, and get the biggest bang for our buck. And that's fine-tuning and retooling what we already have to get better results and drive more money to where that's needed.
Well, there's a concern, I know, on the part of the School Boards Association that if in fact the SALT deduction goes away, that voters somehow take it out on school districts because they can vote on those budgets.
Yeah.
And if in fact you get those budgets rejected and you're still under the 2% property cap, you can't go back to the drawing board.
No. Yeah, and it is a serious concern. I mean, a bulk of your property taxes are school taxes. And so if the deduction off your federal taxes is eliminated for that, you could see voters revolting against what they're paying because now they can't deduct any of it. So yeah, we're very concerned that it will have negative ramifications on school budget votes come May.
So when you have a host of recommendations here,
Yeah.
and the chief of which, from our discussion, is upgrading the student poverty measure for foundation aid and then letting foundation aid run.
Right.
Those are
and using more up-to-date information
right.
because we're still using 2000 census data.
Right. So those are, and also, by the way, and here's another wrinkle, but this is sort of a next couple of years wrinkle. We're about to hit another census.
Yes.
And the census funding at the federal level has been cut. There is a concern that people are not going to participate in the census, and so that also will be negatively impacting you, but not in this year, but in years to come, right? So
Right.
perhaps we put that aside for a moment.
Right.
This is a negotiation that we have during the budget process, right? This is not a statutory legislation negotiation. This is
Right.
going to happen between
Soon.
January and
Yeah.
April.
I mean, the governor's, DOB and the state agencies are developing their budgets now. We hope to influence that decision-making process now, so that when the legislature returns in January, we have more of a consensus about where we want to head. But it's important that we drive the money that we do have in the right direction and make sure that it's being used effectively, used in the right places, and kind of generating the results that we hope to see. We don't want to see the 19% proficiency in low need or high need school districts. We need to raise that to the 68% that's happening in the low need, the wealthier school districts. So we need to make sure the money is driving results.
Well, you've set the table for the discussion, and we will see where we go. Thank you so much,
Thank you for having
Borges.
me. Yeah.